So, speaking of breaking out of mediocrity, how does the Tennessee Volunteer football program do just that and enter the top tier of the SEC in 2024? So, we've had a version of this conversation before relating to recruiting. And probably the most broad way to answer this question is to say, well, they need to recruit at the same level as Georgia has, as Alabama has historically under Nick Saban. We'll see what that looks like under Caleb DeBoer moving forward. Kalen. I always do that. Kalen DeBoer.
Not his evil twin brother, Caleb.
Well, you don't know. It could be a body swap situation. He doesn't actually have a twin. We're just making bleep up at this point. But I guess beyond recruiting and sticking to specifically this season, let's start here. Let's set the baseline. Who are the top tier programs in the SEC? Georgia, obviously. Are we putting Alabama?
Yes.
Okay. Because they did lose a lot in the transfer portal, but they also did bring over...
They gained a whole hell of a lot.
Just as much, I don't want to say just as much talent as they lost, but it's kind of a push for Alabama.
They're one of the most loaded rosters in the country, yes.
You feel pretty good about Alabama?
Yes.
So my definition for top tier is probably going to stop after those two. Does Texas deserve a seat at this table, having appeared in the college football playoff last year, understanding that we are a little uncertain about their quarterback situation, though they don't seem to be that uncertain about their quarterback situation? I don't know that I would be comfortable putting anybody other than Texas in that list of two, because if we're going to tier this thing, then I don't think the tiers need to be even. I think in the same way that we talk about like elite quarterback play, there might be only one elite quarterback any given year in the NFL out of the 32. But people like to, I think, kind of water that down sometimes.
I put Texas there because they are the only SEC school that have recruited close to the level of Alabama and Georgia. They have, in back-to-back years now, had the third best SEC class behind Alabama and Georgia. I understand the class of 2023 for Texas is not technically an SEC class, but you know what I mean. They are a Power 5 conference champion. They've broken through with a college football playoff appearance. They were one or two plays away from being in the national championship game, which who knows what would happen from there. And, Quinn Ewers, if there is uncertainty there, Arch Manning is right behind him. And the recruiting machine that is Texas football is not stopping. So I'm very comfortable putting Texas in that top tier.
The school that I'm not really sure what to do with, and I'm kind of tempted to put them in their own tier for this season, is Ole Miss. Because I believe Ole Miss to be ahead of Tennessee. And I think most college football fans would probably agree with me there. With what Lane Kiffin has, portal king that he has been, adding as much talent to the roster as I think he's had at any point in his tenure in Oxford, does Ole Miss deserve their own tier in this conversation? Or are we going to put them in with Tennessee despite acknowledging that they are ahead of Tennessee?
They're ahead in that they have strung together more consistency in terms of double-digit win seasons, just in that they've done it more than once in this era. And Tennessee just has the 11 wins under Heupel in 2022. This is a really good roster for Ole Miss, and it helps them that they are not trapped in the West and that they don't have to get over the hump that is facing Alabama. They don't play Alabama this year. They play Georgia this year at home, late season. They don't play Alabama, and that is the roadblock they have continuously run into under Lane Kiffin. But it plays out favorably for Ole Miss this year. I'm willing to put them at the top of Tier 2.
So who else is in Tier 2? Because I think LSU belongs in Tier 2. I think that, as you mentioned, Ole Miss belongs in Tier 2. I'm willing to put Oklahoma in that Tier 2.
Yeah, I am too. And I'm putting Missouri in there. Coming back off a double-digit win season, returning their quarterback, returning who I think will be the first receiver whose name is called in the draft in Luther Burden next year. There's a lot to be excited about. There's production to replace for sure on both sides, but with the way Missouri broke through last season and what they bring back, they very comfortably, to me, should be in this Tier 2, and then I think it ends there, personally.
And I agree, because if I'm going to put Missouri at the bottom of Tier 2, I would probably put Missouri and Tennessee pretty close to one another, but then I'm going to relegate Tennessee to a Tier 3 team in this year's SEC. How then can they break through? Because we're talking, the discussion that you wanted to have this morning is top tier. And right now, unless Nico has, nothing short of a Heisman Trophy season, I don't know how they could just outright leapfrog the programs that we're talking about in Missouri, Ole Miss, Oklahoma, and who else did we mention in that?
It was Ole Miss, Tennessee, Missouri, Oklahoma, and LSU. But when you're talking about LSU as a program, yes, but for this season, then you can argue either way because defense should take a step forward. Offense is going to take a step back. So it'll be interesting to play out. But yes, does Tennessee get back to what they were in 2022 with a higher level talent profile at quarterback in Nico than Hendon Hooker was? Because Josh Heupel squeezed everything he could have out of Hendon Hooker, right, in that season. Can Heupel get that and then some with Nico Iamaleava, who is a better pro prospect coming out, was a bigger high school football prospect coming out? I don't know. Josh Pate says he's so angry listening to this.
Well, he'll have his time. He's got about an hour before he can come in here and blow off some steam.
He's shaking.
So I wonder what he most takes issue with. I suppose we'll ask him in about an hour.
I suppose.
So what can they do to make that legitimate jump? Because, just looking at some of the programs who were considering top tier. Alabama scoring 34 points per game last year, giving up less than 20 as far as opponents scoring against. Georgia scoring north of 40 points per game and allowing less than 16 points per game. And I'm just doing this by very, very basic counting stats. Tennessee averaging 31.8 in 2023 and allowing opponents to score 20.3 against them. Defensively has been the thing that they've needed to build up the most. They've been able to manufacture. They have had talent on the offensive side of the ball. We're not that far removed from 2022 where you had Jalen Hyatt, Cedric Tillman, Hendon Hooker, and a top 10 pick at right tackle in Darnell Wright all go to the NFL draft. And then, you replace that, or you try to replace that as best you can. And Joe Milton is not Hendon Hooker in that offense, and you understand why they slumped a little bit, but it was always viewed, at least I think we all around here always viewed it as a stopgap year. Like you just have to get through the Milton year to get to the Nico Iamaleava tenure at Tennessee, however that looks. I struggle, though, putting them in a third tier, Tennessee, but it's the thing. It's the consistency. We have the flash in the pan year that 2022 was. That's the anomaly to date. We have a solid year for Tennessee last season, managing the situation, managing the roster attrition that they had, and still looking like we expect them to look in most of these games. Defensively is where the recruiting has obviously picked up under Josh Heupel's tenure, and you understand how well staffed that coaching staff is with so many high-level recruiters on it, and how that's paid dividends throughout the course of now multiple seasons, because we are heading into 4 years of Josh Heupel?
Yeah.
On Rocky Top. So am I doing Tennessee a disservice by placing them, by thinking that they start this season in Tier 3? Because I'm even having a hard time justifying that, understanding that programs like Missouri and LSU have fared better in recent memory, but this is a different season.
Sure, just in that there is a lot to prove still. Nico Iamaleava has not started a full season, but when you look at what made Tennessee a double-digit win team in 2022, what brought them to the cusp of the 14 playoff? Okay, Josh Heupel, elite quarterback play, good offensive line play to power a good running game, and a very talented and deeply productive wide receiver core. So how does that transfer over to 2024? Those are the biggest factors that made Tennessee an 11-win team in 2022, beat Alabama, all of those things. Okay, Heupel's still there. The quarterback can be elite. he showed flashes of that against a very good defense in the bowl game in Iowa, 35-0 final. A deeper wide receiver core, without question, the deepest that he has had so far at Tennessee.
But my holdup, just before you move on, do they use the depth? Because the rotation for the wide receivers has been pretty consistently tight under Josh Heupel. So while I appreciate that there is that depth, and maybe, because you'll experience injuries throughout the course of the season, you don't know how to predict that. And you hope that it can you're trying to get to the point where a lot of these top-tier programs are, where you can plug and play 5-star, 4-stars all over the place and keep the thing rolling. So it's not, you don't necessarily have to utilize all of that depth, but how much does that depth actually come into play?
It's a fair question, and it's going to be a really interesting question to answer this season, because that 2022 team, all of those key players, Tillman, Hyatt, and we'll say,
with the exception of Hendon Hooker at the end. Are you talking about health?
Well, I'm talking about all of those contributors in 2022 that made Tennessee season what it was. We'll say Tillman, Hyatt, and Hooker. None of those were brought in by Josh Heupel. None of them.
Yeah.
So now doing it with players that were brought to this program by Josh Heupel, Brew McCoy, Squirrel White, Chris Brazzell, the Tulane transfer, and the depth there, Mike Matthews, the 5-star receiver in the wings. That's what gets people excited about what this Tennessee offense can be in terms of re-energizing what they did in 2022. Now, what held Tennessee back in 2022? Like, to you, what were the key things that held Tennessee back from actually being a playoff team in 2022?
Well, I mean, the South Carolina game.
The South Carolina game.
That's
defense.
Most glaringly. The defense, I mean, giving up, looking that lifeless against Spencer Rattler, when Spencer Rattler hadn't really done that to anybody all season long, that I can remember off the top of my head.
Yep.
I would have to go and refresh my memory about Spencer Rattler's 2022 season. But that was the Spencer Rattler moment, and it happened to come at Tennessee's expense. The defensive back play is probably the thing that sticks out the most in my mind.
Sure. And just overall depth. That was not a deep enough roster to actually contend for a national championship. The offense elevated that team in a way that made them look like national championship contenders. Truly, though, with the bones of the roster, Tennessee, I don't think, was a national title contender in 2022. You beat Alabama, yes, but the amount of things that had to go right for you in that game and to go toe-to-toe and outscoring Alabama in that game, we saw what a national championship contender looks like when Tennessee played Georgia that year, and Georgia caved Tennessee's offensive line in that game. Their defensive back stifled Tennessee's receivers. Vols couldn't get anything going. So if we're going to go with defense, specifically the defensive backfield and overall depth, okay, those three things are very much improved from 2022 to 2024. So if you're talking about Tennessee elevating from that 10, 11 win season, that has to carry over. The offense has to carry over to 24 with a quarterback that this coach brought in, receivers that this coach brought in, and what figures to be a better offensive line in 2024 than it was in 2022. If that all carries over and you get a similar offensive profile and the defense is elevated with an emphasis on the pass rush, because Tennessee is better, they're more athletic, they're as athletic as they've been in the defensive backfield under Heupel, but they have an opportunity to have one of the best pass rushing units in the SEC. And it's not just James Pierce, who is being talked about as a potential number one overall pick. It's Caleb Herring continuing to grow into this program. Like, there is depth along, I mean, it's Joshua Josephs. There is depth along the pass rushing unit and along the defensive line that gives you hope that those 10-11 wins could maybe be turned into 11-12 wins and into a 12-team college football playoff spot. So that's the biggest key for me, is looking at the things that held Tennessee back from 2022 and how that applies to 2024. Yet still, I think this team, I think Georgia football is still Tennessee proof. Like, I don't know that Tennessee, Tennessee still, I don't think, is deep enough to compete with Georgia football. So how do we organize the parameters of Tennessee getting into the top tier of the SEC if we still think they're going to fall short of Georgia, who is right now the pinnacle of the conference?
The Oklahoma game is critical this year, because that's a program that we're, at least in your and I's discussion, we'll see how Pate feels about it here in just a little bit. Oklahoma is the best opportunity, I guess, for a prove-it game beyond Georgia, which you're kind of looking at and saying, I don't think this is the year quite. Again, unless I almost said Hendon Hooker, unless Nico has the kind of season that none of us expected Hendon Hooker to have, because I sure as hell didn't expect that from Hendon Hooker before the season started. Josh Heupel didn't expect that from Hendon Hooker. That's why Joe Milton started the year. I'm looking at the Oklahoma game. I'm circling the Oklahoma game if I'm a Tennessee fan and saying, okay, if we want to really, talk about, I don't want to just say getting back to that point, but announcing themselves truly, then that game, it's in Norman, right?
Yeah.
That game in Norman is a huge opportunity to puff your chest out, walk into Oklahoma Stadium and say, okay, enough of this. We are at least able to compete on the same level, if not better or best you in your own place.
Now, Oklahoma had a similar year this past season that Tennessee had in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
Year two of the program, you see a spike in offensive production. You see the signature win for OU against Texas. Tennessee, it was, of course, Alabama in 2022. They do not return the quarterback, and Jackson Arnold, the 5-star, is going to be the starter this year for OU. But there are some parallels there. Obviously, the profile of the head coach very different, with Brent Venables being a defensive guy. But, yeah, you're right. I mean, that Week 4 game in Norman is a massive tone setter for, okay, what kind of season are we really going to have here? And I think that opinion will largely be based on what happens in Norman. And 12-team playoff, that's the era we're in. So Tennessee can lose that game. Tennessee can lose 2, maybe 3 games and still be in contention for the 12-team playoff. But, yes, all eyes are going to be on that game. Got to get through NC State first, Week 2 at a neutral site.
What do I have to give away for the next segment, Jackson?
Family 4-pack for NSC taking on Orlando July 17th at Geodis Park.
Okay, to win the Family 4-pack of Nashville SC tickets, all you need to do coming up next is call in and give us the thing that made you say, oh no. 615-737-1045 is the number. I'm Buck Reising. It's 1045 The Zone.